DCS came up with
Apex, yep.
right? And I heard that MSB is come up with
Sure.
the new thing. Why should people choose CH?
Well, I always suggest listening.
Yeah.
MSB makes a wonderful product. DCS is currently in this category probably the biggest. Wadia was that, and then whatever they decided to do allowed DCS to become that. Wadax makes a wonderful product as well. I find the C1.2 to actually be a value. The price of a C1.2 by itself is the same price as a Rossini with clock. And I am happy to let anybody do a listening comparison.
Yeah.
What's really interesting is we do make an external clock.
Right.
I mentioned how much energy went into the development of our clock system.
Right.
And even the C1 is equally advanced to a Rossini with clock. The C1.2 is actually another generation further. So we can't, doing the same clock again makes no sense. So when we made our external clock, the T1, we use a 10 megahertz clock, which is very difficult to work with. It's not a multiple of audio.
Exactly.
It requires that we do it differently, and we actually reference in the digital domain. Instead of clocking PLL, which is analog domain, we're actually DPLL. We're doing in the digital domain. It's a much more complicated way to do it, and in fact, the Vivaldi clock has a 10 megahertz input.
Right.
I can only imagine why, because it is better. We have accuracy with 10 megahertz to 4 nines on the right side of the decimal point, unless you want more, because we do have an option that allows you to connect via GPS to the atomic clock. That gives you 2 more nines. Now, if you can hear it, great. I recommend it to everybody, because by the time you do a C1.2 with a T1, you probably have also upgraded and added the X1, and we talked about power supply. The power supply goes in front of the existing power supply. It does not replace it. So it's in addition to, and it regulates part of the power supply that we continue to use, and then offers other power supply. Yeah. And so now you have a 3-piece, unless you've also added a transport, 4-piece. We're actually getting into where Vivaldi is. Well, a C1.2 by itself is already a Rossini with clock. So we're actually this side pricing-wise of a DCS offering a great value. And I could have started with the C1.2 without trading anything in. You can't go from a Rossini to a Vivaldi without selling your Rossini. But I could do a C1.2 and next year add an X1, and the following year add a T1. If I don't spin discs, I stop there, except I have one more upgrade. And you haven't traded or lost anything. I have a mono version of the C1.2, and I consider it the best DAC in the industry. What we do, as you know, digital sources, you only have one input, one USB or one Ethernet, etc. So you end up with a controller, and then you have a left DAC and a right DAC. So it's actually 3 boxes. That's the only upgrade that we have that must come back to Switzerland. The price is the price difference between a mono and a stereo. So there's no price loss if you decide to do that later. Your distributor will ship it back to us, and we will convert your unit to mono. Or you could just do it right up front. But that starts becoming very interesting. That's a level of performance that, until you hear it, I can't even describe it. Because it's very difficult to hear a 4-box CD, C1.2, T1, X1, and imagine that there's anything better. And then you play the mono version, and it's mind-blowing. I don't know of anybody else that's offering that kind of building block without taking a severe hit financially, right? Because we're talking about very expensive, top-of-the-line select MSBs or Vivaldis or Rossini. This is not entry-level. This is not Denon. No offense to Denon, but this is what we call it real money.
One of my friends connected T1 to Vivaldi, and it sounds better.
Of course it does. Yeah, the 10 megahertz clock is absolutely amazing. We weren't going to make a clock. The clock was almost an accident, and I have to thank DCS because they taught the industry that clocks matter. We did so much engineering. Remember I mentioned that Florian and Terry were OEM manufacturers of and designers of some of the best digital products the industry had seen until then. So when we made the C1, It was better than any digital product on the market, and that meant the clocks had to be better.
Some users with T1 with GPS options, it's sometimes difficult to connect to a GPS.
There are sometimes, like with all satellite, I have a Garmin watch that I run with, and I can't explain why it works flawlessly here in Seoul, works flawlessly in Tokyo, and in Seattle, it's a nightmare to get it to work. I can't explain it. So some areas, it must be the cloudy without GPS. The 10 megahertz clock, accurate to 0.99997. Last year in Munich high-end, I played a C1, so people had a reference. And then I played the C1.2. So people heard how much better the C1.2 was. And then I added the clock, just so people could know, yeah, it really does make a difference. And when we originally did it, because there was so much energy done in the internal clock of the C1, we didn't think a clock was ever necessary. So because of DCS, they made us make a clock. And so we figured, well, if we're going to make a clock, there's only one place to go. And that's the best clock, the industry standard, the professional standard.
Excellent. How many times have you been in Korea?
This is my second time. I was here about 10 years ago at this show.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. How is it different from 10 years ago and now?
So I travel different now. Because I was asked this yesterday, and I can't tell. And the reason being is when I came before, I went from hotel to car to show, to restaurant to hotel.
So you didn't get to see any part of Seoul?
Yeah, so I did go to an older area that I got to look at some of the beautiful pottery that I guess the Japanese buy from you. They buy it all up. And I learned about the beautiful artwork, the pottery artwork and some of the silk products and that are really unique to Korea. And so that was the one part I did see that I haven't seen on this trip. As I travel now, I tend to run in the mornings. And part of my forcing myself to run, I hate to run. I do it just because I need some exercise. But it also allows me to see the streets. And so this trip I actually have seen more of Seoul, well, this area of Seoul, because my hotel's about 2 kilometers away, 2.5 kilometers away. But I'm on the street. The funniest thing, because I'm from Seattle, I live in Seattle, a small chain of stores that you might have heard of. I now learned, we looked on the internet, there's 1,774 Starbucks in Korea, and they're from Seattle. You have more than we have. And I would not have known that had I not been on the street, and there's 3 of them between my hotel and here. And that doesn't include the coffee people and the two someplace, and what's the other one? G or Mega Coffee. So so between the 1,774 Starbucks, there's more than that of other coffee companies combined. So I've never seen more coffee shops.
So how did COVID affect you in business-wise?
Well, business-wise, it's interesting. If you talk to a number of the people in our industry, the speaker manufacturers, other electronics manufacturers and that, the super high-end audio industry has flourished. COVID was very good for all of us, with an exception, parts. And this is the other portion of CH that is quite interesting in how Florian, as a CEO, runs our company differently. And as we've seen on the horizon difficulties with procuring some of the parts, components at this level have to be stored in temperature and humidity controlled environments. That won't be a big surprise to you. So we have continued to invest in, I call them refrigerators. They're not refrigerators, but we have a lot of parts. And so Florian is always running very far in advance. We have probably 4 or 5 times the parts that any of our competitors have. And that allows us to be fairly close to 6-week delivery is our plan with 10 series. Our 1 series we expect to be able to deliver 2 to 2 weeks, so 2 days to 2 weeks. We're relatively close. Once in a while, something might slip a little beyond that, but for the most part, we're very, very reliable in shipping. The other way we run our company is to build a product and say that it's made in Switzerland. It requires that 60% of it be made in Switzerland. And so the watch industry is a great example. 60% of the watch is the box. We actually build in Switzerland. And all of our machining is done in the Jura Mountains, which happens to be the valley of the watch. It's where watches are made, the most famous Swiss watches. Our boards we do in, it's right next to Montreux, which is about 30 kilometers from our office, where we do all of our design, all of our manufacturing, all of our service, marketing, everything is done by us. If we need a part that for some reason we've run low on, could be the spikes for the amps. They're made in the same factory as the chassis. It's about 2.5 hours. We're running back and forth twice a week with machining. So we're very, very responsive to trends and changes and the like. And so that's part of our secret to growing in this era. And again, that's the difference between a CEO that buys an airplane or a Porsche GT3 or one that's investing in refrigerators for parts. We have parts.
Okay, excellent. So should people upgrade to C1.2?
Absolutely. It is such a value. The performance in US dollar, $32,000 is what a C1 was at the end. $36,000 is what a C1.2 is. So for $4,000, you could have, if you've done all of the upgrades, as I mentioned, we offered upgrades at reduced pricing to allow you to have a contemporary piece. So if you had a 10-year-old C1 that you've upgraded along the way, for $4,000 you have the new one. That's a lot less of a loss than going backwards. If you didn't do any of the upgrades, you just have to do those, because the C1.2 does require the new streaming board if you stream, the new digital board, and the new display. We can also do that at the time of upgrade. You just have to catch it up to the most contemporary.
All right. Thank you for sharing time with us.
Absolutely. No, thank you. I love talking about CH. There's so many more things we could talk about. So
well, next year, next year,
that's right.
We'll
next
definitely
year.
talk about new things. In Munich.
We're very excited. Munich is the biggest show now in the world. Hong Kong is second. So actually Hong Kong is a very important show for us as well. And it looks like this year Hong Kong will be open to foreigners. So I will be in Hong Kong as well in August. And we make the 1 Series. We currently make only a line stage and amplifier in the 10 Series. So you can use your imagination of what might be coming in the future. We're not making things smaller. We're making bigger things.
You will need a bigger refrigerator then.
You will need at least 2 shelves more.
All right, thank you.
You bet.